Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're diving deep into the psychology of a demographic that's rarely talked about, Gen X men. You know them. They're the guys born between 1965 and 1980. They're the ones who seem a little distant. They're the ones who don't talk about their feelings much. They're the ones who seem like they have everything figured out but somehow seem quietly lost. They're your fathers, your uncles, your bosses, your partners. And their psychology is fascinating because they were shaped by a unique moment in history that created a very particular type of man. I'm a psychologist who specializes in generational psychology and men's psychology, and I've spent years studying what actually drives Gen X men. And here's what I've found. Gen X men are driven by very different things than the generations before them and the generations after them. Understanding what drives them gives us insight into why they behave the way they do, why they struggle the way they do, and how we can have more compassion for them. Let's start with the foundational driver, self-reliance. Gen X men were raised by parents who were often emotionally unavailable. Their fathers were the post-war generation, often emotionally closed off. Their mothers were beginning to enter the workforce, often juggling multiple roles and unable to provide constant emotional support. So Gen X boys learned early that they had to figure things out alone. This created men who are incredibly self-reliant. They don't depend on others. They solve problems on their own. They don't ask for help. They figure it out. This self-reliance is a strength. It makes them capable. It makes them resourceful. But psychologically, it means they often feel isolated. They don't know how to ask for support. They don't know how to be vulnerable. And this self-reliance becomes a cage that traps them. The second major driver is what I call stoic competence. Gen X men are driven by being good at things. They're driven by competence. They want to be skilled, capable, and independent. They want to do things well. But here's the psychological component. This isn't just about achieving. It's about proving something. It's about proving they're worthy. It's about proving they're not a burden. It's about proving they can take care of themselves. This drive toward competence often shows up in their careers. Gen X men tend to be workaholics. They define themselves by what they do. They measure their worth by their professional accomplishments. They're the generation that still believes in hard work paying off, that you can move up if you work hard enough. But the psychological shadow side is that when their competence is challenged, when they lose a job, when they make a mistake, when they can't fix something, they experience a profound crisis of identity. The third driver is what I call detached pragmatism. Gen X men are pragmatic. They're not idealists. They don't expect things to work out. They expect obstacles. They prepare for the worst. This pragmatism is a psychological response to growing up during economic uncertainty, during the Cold War, during a time when nothing felt stable. But this pragmatism has a cost. Gen X men tend toward cynicism. They struggle to hope. They struggle to believe that things can get better. They struggle to invest in things emotionally because they're protecting themselves from disappointment. This pragmatism that kept them safe as kids now keeps them emotionally distant as adults. The fourth driver is what I call the invisibility imperative. Gen X men grew up invisible. They were sandwiched between two larger generations. They weren't fussed over like millennials. They weren't revered like baby boomers. They learned not to need attention. They learned not to need recognition. They learned to just do their thing without needing anyone to see them or praise them. This shows up psychologically as a lack of need for external validation. Gen X men are less likely to post on social media. They're less likely to seek attention. They're less likely to talk about their accomplishments. But there's a shadow side to this too. They can feel deeply unseen. They can feel like their contributions don't matter. They can feel like they're living invisible lives even when surrounded by people who care about them. The fifth driver is what I call the scarcity mindset. Gen X men grew up during recessions. They watched their parents lose jobs. They watched their parents' marriages fall apart. They learned that the world is unstable. They learned that you need to accumulate resources to survive. So many Gen X men are driven by accumulation, accumulating money, accumulating security, accumulating possessions, accumulating status. This drive kept them financially responsible. Many Gen X men are financially stable because they planned for the worst. But psychologically, this scarcity mindset means they struggle to relax. They struggle to spend money on themselves. They struggle to believe they have enough. Even wealthy Gen X men often feel poor because the scarcity mindset is so deeply embedded in their nervous system. The sixth driver is what I call the suppression of emotion. Gen X men were socialized in a particular way. They were taught that emotional expression was weakness. They watched their fathers not cry. They experienced ridicule if they showed vulnerability. They learned that the only acceptable emotion for men is anger. So Gen X men learned to suppress their feelings. This suppression is remarkable when you think about it. Gen X men can experience profound loss, profound pain, profound grief, and they compartmentalize it. They move on. They function. They don't fall apart. But psychologically, this suppression has a cost. Gen X men have higher rates of suicide than any other demographic. They have higher rates of addiction. They have higher rates of heart disease linked to stress and emotion suppression. The emotions don't disappear. They manifest in physical and psychological illness. The seventh driver is what I call the reluctant responsibility. Gen X men often became fathers during an economically unstable time. They often became fathers without the emotional modeling or support that previous generations had. So they were driven by responsibility, the responsibility to provide, to protect, to be the stable one. But this responsibility often came without the emotional connection they might have wanted. Gen X fathers often worked long hours to provide. They were present but not emotionally available. They were responsible but not connected. And now, as they watch their children grow up, many of them feel like they missed it. They feel like they were so focused on being responsible that they missed the relationship. This regret is profound and often unspoken. The eighth driver is what I call competent loneliness. Gen X men are often lonely. They don't have deep friendships the way other generations do. They're used to handling things alone, so they don't reach out. They're used to not needing people, so they don't build close bonds. And yet they crave connection. But the skills for deep connection, vulnerability, emotional expression, asking for help are foreign to them. This shows up psychologically as a kind of quiet desperation. They're functioning. They're doing well on the surface. But internally, many Gen X men are profoundly lonely. They have acquaintances but not close friends. They have partners but not emotional intimacy. They have children but not real connection. And because of their self-reliance, they don't know how to change this. The ninth driver is what I call the crisis of relevance. Gen X men grew up in a world that was slowly changing. They were told that if they worked hard, they'd be fine. But then they watched the world change in ways they didn't expect. Technology disrupted industries. The economy became unstable again. Younger generations seemed to have different values, and Gen X men started to feel irrelevant. This is particularly acute in men who define themselves by their careers. When their expertise became outdated, when their skills became less valuable, when younger people moved past them, they experienced an identity crisis. And because their identity was so tied to competence and self-reliance, they didn't know how to navigate this shift. The 10th driver is what I call reconciliation with mortality. Gen X men are getting older. They're in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and they're starting to recognize that they're not going to live forever. They're starting to recognize that they spent decades pursuing things that maybe don't matter as much as they thought. They're starting to recognize that they sacrificed relationships for work. They're starting to recognize that they're running out of time to build the things they actually want. This recognition is creating a particular kind of psychological crisis. Gen X men are waking up. They're starting to ask themselves, what was it all for? Did I do the right things? Do I have time to build deeper relationships? Can I express myself emotionally now? Am I allowed to be vulnerable? Can I ask for help? And for many of them, the answer feels like no. They're too set in their ways. They've been alone too long. They've suppressed their emotions too much. But here's what's important to understand about all of these drivers. They're not fixed. Gen X men are not destined to be isolated, emotionally suppressed, lonely men. They're capable of change, and I'm seeing it happen. I'm seeing Gen X men starting to talk about their mental health. I'm seeing them going to therapy. I'm seeing them having deeper conversations with their friends. I'm seeing them being more present with their families. I'm seeing them starting to ask for help. And it's beautiful to witness because it's not easy for them. It goes against everything they were taught, but they're doing it anyway. So if you're a Gen X man, I want you to know that it's not too late. You can still build deeper connections. You can still express your emotions. You can still ask for help. You can still be vulnerable. It won't come naturally. It will feel uncomfortable. But you've already proven that you can do uncomfortable things. You've been doing uncomfortable things your whole life. And if you know Gen X men, if you're married to one, if you work with one, if you're the child of one, understanding what drives them, understanding their psychology can create more compassion. They're not distant because they don't care. They're distant because they were taught to be self-sufficient. They're not emotionally unavailable because they're cold. They're emotionally unavailable because they were taught to suppress. They're not workaholics because they're selfish. They're workaholics because they're trying to prove their worth. When you understand this, you can approach them differently. You can invite them into deeper connection without shaming them for not being there naturally. You can express your needs without expecting them to magically know what you need. You can have compassion for their struggle. Gen X men are at a particular moment in their lives. They're old enough to have perspective but young enough to still have time. They're realizing that the things they thought would make them happy, money, status, achievement, don't fulfill them the way they expected. And they're starting to wonder what actually matters. And here's the beautiful thing, many of them are finding that what actually matters is connection. It's relationships, it's being seen, it's being known, it's vulnerability, it's asking for help. All the things they were taught not to do, all the things they've been afraid of. So if you're a Gen X man, I encourage you. Start small. Tell one person how you really feel. Ask for help with one thing. Reach out to one friend and have a real conversation. Sit with your family without your phone. Be present. Be vulnerable. Be real. And if you know Gen X men, I encourage you to invite them into deeper connection. Tell them you see them. Tell them you appreciate them. Tell them it's okay to struggle. Tell them it's okay to not have all the answers. Tell them you're there. Because what drives Gen X men is finally starting to shift. And that shift toward connection, toward vulnerability, toward being real, that's beautiful. That's growth. That's healing. Thank you for watching. If you're a Gen X man, I'd love to hear in the comments what drives you. What keeps you going? What do you struggle with? And if you're not, what have you observed about the Gen X men in your life? Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you in the next video.